Hello, this is Dr. Prentiss Taylor from Doctor on Demand. We're going to be talking together today about what's currently known about COVID-19 vaccines. For our first segment, we're going to be dealing with people's feelings of uncertainty about these vaccines in particular. Let's go on to the next slide. Just briefly about me, this just tells you that I'm an internal medicine and preventive medicine physician where I've gone to school and trained. And I'm here as a vice president for medical affairs at Doctor on Demand, which is the leading innovative national telemedicine company. So thank you for your attention today. Let's go on to the next slide. So a lot has happened over this past year of the pandemic. So many of us have been touched by this, and as a physician who sees patients here part-time, I can tell you I have treated hundreds of patients in various stages of COVID, so I know how people have been affected. And we've also dealt increasingly lately with people's concerns about the vaccines, both in terms of should they get it, and if they've just recently got it and they're having some mild side effects, just helping people interpret that. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So we know that from about late February, early March of 2020, we've seen the effects of stay-at-home orders, wearing masks, social distancing, washing our hands a lot, and all the signs that we've had to obey, which are rightly so in terms of trying to keep people safe and limiting the spread of the pandemic. And luckily, we're at a point where things are starting to turn, focused towards getting to herd immunity, and we can get back to our normal lives gradually when the all clear is sounded. Next slide, please. So we want to know today that we want to cover that there are 3 vaccines approved for use in the United States. I wanted to go over what these vaccines are. And we wanted to also realize that currently at least 100 million Americans have received 1 vaccine dose. And the statistics I saw this morning is that 77 million Americans have been fully vaccinated at this point. And the latest information shows that the chance of getting a severe reaction is small, very small. We'll talk about that. And it, by and large, protects people. So there have been very few cases of people who've been getting vaccinated, getting COVID at all. When they get it, it tends to be mild. So the antibodies and the immune system response is effective, very effective for these vaccines. And very few people have had to be hospitalized. I actually did a calculation this morning. And so after you've been vaccinated, the risk of getting sick at all is less than 1/100th of 1%. If I can boil that down to you, that means of those 77 million people who are fully vaccinated, that only about 77,000 have had any issues at all, and those have been mostly mild. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So there's a lot of hesitancy and uncertainty, and it's certainly very understandable. And the theme of today's talk is not going to be so much preaching to people, but more trying to share information and insights. And it's legitimate to have questions about these vaccines. It's certainly appropriate for people to be able to make up their own minds about what's best for them. And so we're talking to you today in the spirit of this, helping you be as informed as possible based on current knowledge to date as of April 15th, 2021. Next slide, please. So there is some uncertainty, and we have to understand that that's a key thing that happens with science. We have to continuously study things and make decisions based on experts who know a lot about infectious diseases, immunity, and so on. We know that trust is very important in healthcare in general, and trust is important in any public health campaign. One size doesn't fit all. Everyone's different. We know that 1/3 of Americans have indicated they're hesitant about getting a COVID vaccination. And in some communities, even communities of color, we know that that hesitancy is higher. And there are understandable reasons for that given our country's history. So we also know that of people out there who have no health insurance, as many as 45% of those folks have indicated that they're hesitant in polls that have been done. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So this is just a graphic that indicates what we're trying to do is bridge the gap between myths on the one hand and science and facts on the other. So we're trying to fill in the middle and help you make an informed decision. Next slide, please. So common questions that come up are the vaccines safe? How often do people get side effects? And how effective are the shots against the new variant? So let me pause there. We'll go into some of the other questions. I just addressed the safety. One of the things we want to remind you is that doctors and nurses were asked to step forward back in December and January and be the first to be immunized. So I can tell you personally that I was immunized in early December, getting my first Pfizer shot, and got the second shot at the appropriate time later. And all I had for side effects was a little bit of fatigue, but nothing that a cup of coffee couldn't fix. I have a son who's a nurse in the ICU, and when he got his shots, he did have about 16 hours of feeling even more fatigued and kind of like he had the flu, but that passed. And, Tylenol helped with that. And so those are generally what I'd want to leave people with, that the side effects that occur in the vast majority of people are what less than half of people get. And they're very much like what people get with a flu shot. These shots are actually more effective than flu shots are. And to date, as I understand from briefings from Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is the chief medical officer of this campaign, that they're thus far effective against the variants that have been studied. But more studies continue to come out. What we anticipate will probably happen is there will be a need for booster shots for the next year or two against new variants that arise. And we should understand that there are variants that arise with any virus. That happens with the flu shot, and that's why people need to get a flu shot every year. Next question is, how long does it take to get protected? Well, we know that within 2 weeks, you get an effective antibody response in terms of your immune system with each shot. So if I can break it down to you, the first shot gives you about 60% protection. And the second shot is kind of a booster shot in the 2-shot series that gets you up to about 100% protection against this virus. How long does the immunity last is one of the questions. We don't know totally, but thus far, we think that it will be different in different people. In elderly people, it may not last as long, but it does look like thus far the immunity is going to be very useful for at least a year. It's interesting because they, on 60 Minutes, just this past weekend, did a study of the people who had survived the 1918 Spanish flu. So they found a few people still alive at ages like 101, 103, and they tested their blood, and they still have antibodies and immunity cells against that Spanish flu virus. So that is pretty amazing that people still have protection 100 years later. And we hope that ultimately that's what's going to happen with this pandemic. Some people have asked about a couple of celebrities. There are certainly celebrities who have been affected with COVID. Some people asked about a month or so ago about the famous baseball player, Hall of Fame player, Hank Aaron, who has lived down in the Atlanta area. Now, Hank Aaron, we have to understand, was 80-something years old and had multiple other problems. He died 1 week after getting a COVID shot, and they extensively investigated and couldn't find any relationship between him getting a COVID shot and him dying. It just, in their view, was natural causes for somebody who's up in his 80s and had a lot of other conditions. Here is a question: are you and other doctors getting a shot? Well, I already told you I got my shot. I'm doing well, and have I would say over 90% of my colleagues that I've talked to have gotten the COVID shot, and certainly everybody is doing very well. Don't know anybody who's had any serious illness related to this. Are there any long-term studies on these shots? Well, no, there aren't, because we're only a year into this, so long-term studies would take years. and those studies will be done. Next question is, if I don't get to stop wearing masks and social distancing, why should I get these shots? Well, the reason for that is because COVID, as we know, kills about 6% of people who get it. And many other people get quite ill and can't work. So not being able to work, not being able to go to school, having to be quarantined is certainly no fun. And it's like, I would say, for the people I've treated with COVID, like having a really bad case of the flu with a lot of headaches and, feeling a lot of fatigue and cough and losing your sense of smell, not being able to taste your food and all of that is the typical kind of syndrome. And then where can I get my shot? Well, what's happened, as you know, is in many parts of the country, public health authorities have rolled out to giving these shots, whether it's at pharmacies or health institutions. Many people's regular doctors, if there was some sort of health system or large group, they've been able to get them through their doctor. So if you ask around, call the public health entity in your community and they will help you get a shot. Let's go on to the next slide. So of the FDA approved vaccines against COVID in the United States currently, the Pfizer and Moderna shots are what are called mRNA shots. That sounds for messenger RNA. We're going to show you a breakout of that in a moment. But these slides are highly effective. And we know that of the people who were studied in the clinical trials, like each of these vaccines was studied on about 40,000 people before they were allowed to be released and approved to the general population. Now, currently, there's some concern about the Johnson & Johnson shot, the one they call the J&J shot, which is a one shot versus the two shot series that you have with Pfizer and Moderna. That shot is not a messenger RNA shot. It's more like a conventional flu shot. It uses a neutralized virus to bring DNA. So it's a DNA shot that goes into the nucleus of your cells and convinces the nucleus of your muscle cells and your immune system to start producing the antibodies. I've gotten questions from people who say, well, gee, does that mess with my DNA, my genetic material? And certainly that doesn't seem to be the case as far as we've known. But I should remind you that the vast majority of the flu shots that we've had for years use a similar technology. What's new is the Pfizer and Moderna shots. Let's go on to the next slide because we want to show you a little bit more about this. I'm remembering, in fact, that it's going to be in our next YouTube talk where we have actually a graphic that shows you this. But if I can give it to you just as a mental image, the messenger RNA is a code, basically code of RNA, which is a messenger molecule that tells the ribosomes, it's called, which are little protein factories that float in the outside of cells to make certain proteins. So they make a protein, basically, which is called a antibody, which neutralizes the spike protein of the coronavirus. And that is amplified throughout our immune system. And there are other cells called T cells that float around in our blood. Those are special fighter white cells in the blood that go around looking for invaders. And that's what neutralizes in addition to the antibodies. So we have two ways that happens with these vaccines to neutralize these viruses. All righty. There's a quote here from an expert, Dr. Warner Green, and he was quoted that saying, even with the South African variant, which is out there, what I have seen is the J&J shot protects you from severe disease. So you don't have to go to the hospital or die. And frankly, that's what we want from a vaccine. These vaccines are really fantastic. You might have a runny nose or a mild upper respiratory infection, but you're not going to develop life-threatening pneumonia and require hospitalization or go on a ventilator. He says, I'd sign up for that type of vaccine any day. Let's go on to the next slide. So we want to give you a couple of key takeaways here about our messages. First, we know that getting these vaccines is a personal choice. It's understandable to have questions, And we hope that we've reassured you about some of those questions. Second, we want you to know the facts and to go to trusted websites to avoid myths that are floating around on the internet. So if you go to websites, particularly those of the Centers for Disease Control, there are other institutions you may trust like Johns Hopkins and Mayo Clinic will all have websites on this. So usually whatever is the top trusted health system in your area has the same information on their website. We want to remind you that getting this vaccine can protect you and your community, by the way. So it not only protects you, but it protects you from spreading the virus. And so we highly recommend it. There's been a lot of diversity in the clinical trial. So it's not just been tested on one ethnic group, it's been tested on a variety of people. And the vaccines have been shown to be very, very effective and thus far very safe. So I would say at the current time, please don't be hesitant about getting the mRNA vaccines, which are the ones by Moderna and Pfizer. And we should mention here, we have no commercial connection to any of these vaccine companies. I want to thank you for calling in here today, and we want to wish you well. So this is Dr. Prentiss Taylor from Doctor on Demand, wishing you a healthy year. Bye-bye.